The same power that can heal can also destroy. It all depends on who wields it and why. In the last episode, we uncovered the serpent as the ancient world once knew it, not merely as a symbol of evil, but as a symbol of life itself. We traced it across the sky and the earth, from the Milky Way above to the hidden forces below, from Kundalini in the east to Quetzalcoatl in the west, from the serpent staff of healing to the Uraeus rising from the crown of the pharaoh. Again and again, the serpent appeared as a sacred guide, a force of awakening. But here is where the story changes, because the serpent is neutral. It doesn't judge, it flows. And like every form of power, it can be used to create or to destroy. The same force that awakens can also manipulate. The same knowledge that heals can also control. The same symbol that points upward can also be inverted. That is why the serpent came to be feared. Not because it was always evil, but because it was powerful. And real power is always dangerous in the hands of those who want to rule through ignorance. Over time, the serpent was flattened, demonized, reduced from teacher to tempter, from guide to villain, from sacred current to a forbidden thing. But the wisdom it represented did not disappear. It went underground, hidden in symbols, protected in mystery schools, and misunderstood by the world that inherited only fragments. This is the darker half of the ancient knowledge. How energy can be misused. How individuals and systems drain life instead of protecting it. How awakening without discipline becomes delusion. And how Atlantis, remembered as one of the great crowns of the ancient world, may have fallen not because it lacked knowledge, but because it abused it. This is not just ancient history, it is a warning, because the serpent still lives within us, and the same crossroads Atlantis faced may be standing in front of us now. Welcome back to the third narrative. Have you ever been around someone who leaves you feeling completely drained? Not physically harmed or openly attacked, just emptied. You spend a little time with them and afterward you feel heavy, foggy, off balance, like something was taken from you, even if you cannot explain what. That is what many traditions would call energy vampirism. Now, I'm not saying every difficult person is some literal supernatural creature feeding on your soul. I'm talking about a pattern. Some people drain attention, some drain emotions, your peace, or even drain the room itself. Sometimes they know what they're doing, sometimes they don't. It can happen for many reasons: guilt, fear, neediness, manipulation, control, drama, or simply chaos. We all have them in our lives. The friend who always plays the victim, but never wants a solution. The person who turns every vulnerable moment into a competition. The guilt tripper who makes you feel responsible for feelings you did not create. The passive-aggressive person who never attacks directly, but somehow leaves you smaller than before. The chaos addict who always needs attention, crisis, or emotional rescue. These people are not always evil. They're not wearing cloaks or chanting rituals in the dark. But energetically, something is off. They are not centered in themselves, so they pull from others, and you feel it. That is why boundaries matter, because compassion without boundaries becomes extraction. And once you understand that this can happen between individuals, you begin to see that what happens on the personal level can also happen on the collective level. A person can drain energy, but so can a system, a culture, an institution, an empire. Throughout history, rulers and priesthoods have understood something most people only feel unconsciously. Control the vibe, and you control the people. Keep them afraid, keep them divided, keep them overstimulated, keep them dependent, keep them distracted, keep them ashamed, keep them too tired to think, and they will begin to police themselves. They will carry the prison inside their own nervous system. That is collective energy harvesting, and we see it every day. Think about the news cycle. It has become an emotional machine. Headline after headline, crisis after crisis, wars, diseases, scandals. It's nothing but outrage. Your body is hit over and over until you begin living in reaction. Fear pulls you down into survival. And when you're trapped in survival, you are not creating, you are not dreaming, you are not healing, you are reacting. Then look at entertainment. Not all of it, but most of it is noise. It's non-stop hyperstimulation, sexual obsession, violence, nihilism, addiction. It is dopamine without meaning, pleasure without beauty, attention without depth. It keeps the sacral center overstimulated. The creative force is turned into compulsion. Desire becomes a leash. Then look at our culture. Influencers selling emptiness as success. People trained to perform for clicks rather than becoming. Identity reduced to how you look and how much you make. The solar plexus becomes distorted. Confidence turns into ego. Will becomes domination. And then look at the body itself. Our food is engineered for craving. Screens are engineered for addiction. Our work schedules are engineered for exhaustion. We are constantly placed in environments that make stillness feel impossible. A population that is inflamed, tired, distracted, and anxious is easier to manage. That does not mean every person inside the system is consciously plotting against you. But systems do not need every participant to be evil. They only need the incentives to be inverted. And once they are, the machine begins feeding on your attention, emotions, desires, and fears. That is the harvest. Your focus becomes their currency. Your fear becomes their leverage. Your desire becomes their marketplace. Your confusion becomes their cover. And if you start to wake up, the system has a response ready. They mock you. They shame you. They'll call you a conspiracy theorist and dismiss whatever you say. Because once you see the pattern, you stop feeding it blindly. And that is why understanding your own energy is not just a spiritual matter, it is strategic. But awakening itself carries danger. In the last episode, we explored Kundalini, the serpent power described as resting at the base of the spine. But this is not a toy. Ancient systems did not treat awakening casually. They surrounded it with discipline, preparation, guidance, and moral formation. Why? Because power without structure can break the person who receives it. Some traditions speak of people who awaken energy too quickly and become overwhelmed. They experience visions, heightened sensitivity, grandiosity, fear, and confusion. They touch something real, or something that feels real, but they do not have the container to integrate it. So the ego tries to own the experience. And that is where the danger begins. Instead of humility, there is ego inflation. Instead of clarity, there is delusion. Instead of transformation, there is obsession. This is why Carl Jung took Kundalini seriously. He didn't treat it as some trend or weekend technique, but as a symbolic map of psychic transformation. In his 1932 seminars on Kundalini Yoga, Jung treated the chakra system as a profound model for the development of consciousness. But he also understood the danger of spiritual material entering the Western mind without preparation. Because awakening does not automatically make a person wise. Sometimes it makes the ego larger. Sometimes it gives a person just enough power to become dangerous. The energy is not the problem. The unprepared vessel is. And that is the lesson every serious mystery tradition understood. Before power can be carried, the person must be formed. Those who understood this energy have been known by many names: mystics, shamans, magicians, priests, prophets, sorcerers, initiates. But the name matters less than the use. Some used knowledge to heal, to align, to restore harmony between the human being and divine order. Others used the same knowledge to manipulate, to dominate, to control. This is where people sometimes use terms like white magic and black magic. Now, those terms are not about race. They're about orientation, creation or corruption, harmony or distortion, healing or control. And throughout history, there has been a war over this knowledge. Not always in open battle, but in secrecy, in symbols, in priesthoods, in institutions, in initiation systems. Because whoever controls initiation controls access to power. And whoever controls access to power decides who remains asleep and who is allowed to wake. Atlantis was not just a city. Throughout the third narrative lens, Atlantis represents a civilization that preserved an older science of nature and spirit, energy, symbols, vibration, the study of the human body, the heavens, and the serpent current. But the same knowledge that can elevate can also ruin. So the question becomes, what happens when the stewards of light become seduced by power? What happens when wisdom becomes arrogance? What happens when the energy meant to lift humanity is twisted into a tool of domination? That is the fall of Atlantis. Not just a physical disaster, a spiritual one. A civilization does not collapse only when its buildings fall. It collapses when its soul loses alignment. This is where Madame Helena Blavatsky becomes important. Now, Blavatsky is a controversial figure to say the least. She founded the Theosophical Society and claimed to recover fragments of an ancient wisdom tradition beneath the religions of the world. I'm not presenting her as an unquestionable authority, but as an esoteric lens. In her book, The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky describes the fall of Atlantis in a way that ties everything together. Let me walk you through some of her words, and I'll explain as we go. She writes,
To continue the tradition, we have to add that the class of Hierophants was divided into two distinct categories: those who were instructed by the sons of God of the island and who were initiated in the divine doctrine of pure revelation, and others who inhabited the lost Atlantis and who, being of another race, were born with a sight which embraced all hidden things and was independent of both distance and material obstacle.
Here, she's saying that there are two kinds of spiritual leaders in ancient times. One group received divine instruction. They were taught slowly and with discipline, learning to discern good from evil. The other group, those born in Atlantis, had natural psychic power. They were born with vision beyond the physical, but they didn't earn it. They didn't sacrifice for it. And that is the danger. She continues.
In short, they were the fourth race of men mentioned in the Popol Vuh, whose sight was unlimited and who knew all things at once. They were, perhaps, what we would now term natural-born mediums, who neither struggled nor suffered to obtain their knowledge, nor did they acquire it at the price of any sacrifice.
In other words, they had the power, but not the wisdom. They possessed incredible spiritual and psychic abilities, but lacked the inner development and moral foundation to utilize them responsibly. And then comes the turning point. Blavatsky says,
Therefore, while the former walked in the path of their divine instructors, the born adepts of Atlantis blindly followed the insinuations of the great and invisible dragon, the king Thevetat. Thus, under the evil insinuations of their demon Thevetat, the Atlantis race became a nation of wicked magicians.
The dragon is the serpent inverted. Not the serpent as healer, not the serpent as awakened wisdom, but the serpent as domination. Power coiled around the world instead of rising through the soul. Thevetat represents what happens when the sacred current is captured by ego, when knowledge stops serving life and begins feeding control, when the serpent no longer awakens, it possesses. Through this lens, Atlantis fell because it misused the very knowledge that once made it great. Blavatsky continues.
War was declared. Its substance may be found in the disfigured allegories of the race of Cain, the giants, and that of Noah and his righteous family. The conflict came to an end by the submersion of Atlantis, which finds its imitation in the stories of the Babylonian and Mosaic flood. All flesh died, and every man, all except Xisuthros and Noah.
Blavatsky is connecting this Atlantean conflict to stories that appear later in distorted form. Cain, the giants, Noah, the Babylonian and Mosaic flood traditions, the righteous survivor who preserves what can still be saved. Whether we accept her system literally is not the point. The point is structural. Different traditions keep preserving the same pattern. A world before the flood, a race of giants or semi-divine beings, a corruption of power, a conflict between wisdom and domination, a flood that wipes the slate clean, and a survivor who carries memory forward. That is the pattern. And after the flood, the story does not end. Blavatsky writes,
From the intermarrying of the progeny of the Hierophants and the descendants of the Atlantean Noah sprang up a mixed race of righteous and wicked.
This is the world we inherited. On one side, enlightened sages, Enochs, Moseses, Buddhas, and the saviors of humanity. On the other side, magicians who used their power without love or wisdom, who, intentionally or not, served darker forces. She ends the section by saying,
Moses had no word of rebuke for those deep in prophecy and powers who had been instructed in the colleges of esoteric wisdom. His denunciations were reserved for those who debased the powers inherited from their Atlantean ancestors.
And that's the message. Power isn't the problem. Knowledge isn't evil. But power without love, energy without morality, wisdom without sacrifice, that's the recipe for collapse. That was the lesson of Atlantis, and it's the same lesson we face today, which brings us back to Genesis. In episode 1, we began with the garden, the tree, the serpent, the fall. At the beginning, that story looked simple. A paradise, a command, a forbidden fruit, a serpent, and a punishment. But now, after everything we have traced, that story looks different. What if the fall was not merely about eating fruit? What if it was about humanity receiving knowledge before it had the moral structure to carry it? What if the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was not only a tree, but a symbol of power and knowledge itself? The power to discern, to create, to destroy. The power that can make a human being more divine or more dangerous. In Genesis, the serpent offers forbidden knowledge. Humanity takes it. Their eyes are opened, and paradise is lost. In the Atlantean story, Thevetat offers unearned power. Atlantis takes it. The adepts become wicked magicians, and civilization is swallowed by the sea. Different stories, but same warning. Knowledge without discipline becomes corruption. Power without conscience becomes collapse. The serpent was not the whole problem. The problem is the unformed human being trying to wield what he is not ready to carry. That is the true fall of man. Not curiosity, not knowledge itself, but the misuse of sacred power. A civilization once aligned with spirit and nature fell when its leaders began chasing control instead of wisdom. And what was lost was not only a city, it was a blueprint, a way of understanding energy, morality, symbols, consciousness, and the divine. But the blueprint was not destroyed, because some of it did survive. The flood did not erase everything. It scattered it. The survivors preserved what they could. They encoded knowledge in temples, in myths, in symbols. They passed it into mystery schools, priesthoods, and secret orders. Some protected it because humanity was not ready for the knowledge. Others hoarded it because power is easier to control when the masses remain ignorant. That is the tension running through the whole story. Secrecy can preserve wisdom, but secrecy can also become domination. A mystery school can protect the sacred, or it could become a gatekeeping system. An initiation can form the soul, or it could be used to control the initiate. That is why the serpent is so dangerous. It always asks the same question. What will you do with power? Will you use it to rise, or to rule? Will you serve life, or feed on it? Will you awaken, or dominate? That is the crossroads of Atlantis, and it may be the crossroads of our own age, because the same pattern is here again. Technologies are moving faster than morality, information expanding faster than wisdom, power concentrating faster than character, systems feeding on attention, fear, desire, and division, human beings awakening without formation, and others using that awakening against them. The serpent still moves, and the question is not whether power will return. It already has. The question is whether we will be formed enough to carry it. That is where we go next. Because if the Atlanteans understood cosmic energy, their greatest teachings would not be found only in caves, temples, or symbols. They would also be written in the stars. In the next episode, we look upward to the zodiac. We will explore the great year, the long cosmic cycle that may mark the rise and fall of civilizations. And we will ask the question that grows louder the deeper we dig. If Atlantis was the first great civilization to fall, are we next? I'll see you in the next episode.